Chapter 11. Lord knew you shouldn't unblock him. But as you sat there, contemplating it, going over and over the pros and cons, your mind playing with yes and no, and how nothing ever lasts forever, and so neither should your grudge, gods, you had to talk to him in person one more time before you decided to forgive his sorry ass. Were you going to notify him beforehand? No. How could you? He was blocked. Besides, ambushing him seemed like a pretty good idea to see what he was really like. What are you saying? You know what he's really like. He's a prick. There was no question, no debate. That's just what he was, who he was. Your black jacket, black pants, and black and white shoes hid you while you rushed through the dark. The train you caught had little to no people on it, and as you approached his house, you thought about what you should say, how to not make this encounter awkward and accidental. Of course, there was no logical explanation for why you would show up on a Friday night. He probably wasn't even home, though you wouldn't even let the thought settle. It was the driving force for why you were so confident. You would knock on his door, wait for a few seconds. He wouldn't answer because he wasn't freaking home, and you could go home saying you tried. It was a sound plan, just one you didn't think would happen. Akabane's living room lights were on. They were on, and slight noise as you approached. You heard a conversation, but it wasn't loud, not like it should have been. When you passed the large pane window that was slightly ajar, you realized it was a TV. Not an actual conversation, but a TV. You held your breath as you approached the steps, just as you had that day of the pool party. So many days had gone by since then, but it felt like yesterday. You moved up the steps, bracing yourself. You held up your hand and winced, knocking knuckle against wood twice. At first you heard nothing other than the TV still playing on in the back, but then feet began padding closer and closer to the door. You squared your shoulders, preparing your planned-out speech about how you knew it was late, but you didn't care, and neither should he because he's just as annoying, and no, you didn't care if you were bothering or interrupting him, and how you actually hoped you were. But all that and more fled as the door opened, and Rio appeared within the doorway, her smile fading as if she had been laughing at something beforehand, but now was suddenly caught off guard. A voice yelled from inside the house, "Who is it?" Rio turned her head as if to answer, but then thought better of it. She looked back at you, her blonde ponytail swishing with every movement of her head. "Wrong house," she yelled back, then stepped outside, closing the door slightly. Different emotions flashed through you as you stood there, watching her, she watching you back. Shock, confusion, interest, confusion again. Embarrassment was one of the bigger ones, and somewhere deep down, a flint of jealousy sparked. For what reason? You didn't want to even try to imagine. "What are you doing here?" She was the first to break the silence. She crossed her arms and leaned back on one of the front house walls. You blinked, then blinked again, and breathed her in. What? What were you supposed to say? You had no answer, no real answer to be here, other than you simply wanted to talk to Akabane. But Rio wouldn't believe that. No, you yourself wouldn't believe that. She'd probably think you were here to egg his house, or TP his trees in his front yard. "You haven't been responding to my texts or calls. I thought you were sick or something. I haven't seen you coming out of the entrance gates either." A thought clicked with a question in your head. Then Akabane must have not told her about our meetings. But if that's true, why? Why has he not said anything? You might have voiced it had it not been for the footsteps coming down on the wooden floors. Then the steel blue door swinging open to reveal a disheveled Karma Akabane, wearing the same black t-shirt with a milk box in the center that you had at home. You froze even more as his face turned from Rio to yours. This was even more awkward than you had pictured it. This was entirely the thing you wanted to avoid, but no. Karma, it seemed, was not just his name. You had the slight memory of your hands beginning to shake, your heart picking up speed, but all you could do was stand there, heart and mind and everything else frozen over. "What are you doing here?" Akabane asked, repeating Rio's question. Somehow, some way, something must have clicked in Akabane's tiny brain, because he nodded toward the back and told Rio, "I'll be there in a minute." Rio looked at you one more time, then uncrossed her arms and silently walked back into the house. Akabane watched and waited for her to disappear. He turned back to you, walked out onto the deck, shutting the door behind him, and said, "What's wrong?" That fucking question again. What's wrong? What the hell is wrong? You wanted to scream at him, to throw up your hands and yell, wanted to strangle him. By gods, your hands shook, but not from being in momentary shock. You were ready to pounce when he said, "Don't tell me you just wanted to see me." He grinned in amusement, but you didn't respond. You stood there like a damned statue, because yes, that is actually why you were here. You hadn't wanted to admit it, but yes, you just wanted to see him. That was the reason for being here, for showing up unannounced on his doorsteps on a Friday fucking night. When silence answered his mock question, his grin drooped a bit, and he quietly whispered, "Wait, was it actually?" You turned your head, refusing to meet his gaze. "It doesn't matter. You already have plenty company. I'll leave first then. Good night." You took one step off the deck when a large hand wrapped around your wrist. Your head snapped back. Akabane's mouth twitched slightly. You wanted to glare or scowl or bite his head off. Is all of the above an option? But he only blinked at you, mouth still twitching. "Does this mean you forgive me?" You scoffed, yanking your wrist free. "You are unbelievable." Akabane said, "Am I? Really? Truthfully?" You snapped your head forward, beginning the trek down the stairs. "Well, I've seen you now, haven't I?" Akabane watched you walk away, as if it was he who was now in momentary shock. You looked back at him one last time, glaring at his perfectly stupid face. Gods, I hate you.